So welcome everybody. We're going to start. This is the most important class in real estate. So, class the most current version of the purchase agreement. So it's updated as of yesterday. The purchase agreement that I had marked up before was the July. It's still the July purchase agreement, but they do make changes every day, every other day. So in my shared resource folder under contracts and under offer, this is the new RPA from October 2024. So this is as of yesterday. Download that. I'll share it with everybody. Hey, Richard. Also, like, notice in all right, we'll look at that. All right, once again, to the residential purchase agreement, part one. We get some coffee because I'm not amped up enough.
It's the sync folder. Did you save that? Let's see, I bookmarked it.
No, I did not save it.
I'll
but
find
I
it.
know I have a registration for it.
Let's see.
Let's think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Guess I should be.
Favorite everything.
Yeah.
Some purchase agreements.
Thank you.
Press.
All right.
Let's get a sense. The first question is, where do we get our contracts? So, our contracts, like. Better than looking at a blank wall. Where do the contracts come from? So. They come from. Yeah. This is where you go to get your contracts. So. You don't have to do this, I'm just showing you because I'm going to give you the form. Hello. So when you sign in. Be an alternate reality. Transactions. So you want to go transactions in the big bubble. And this transactions. Validate you. And then you will go into transactions. This is going to take you to the main transactions page. When you're gonna write an offer, you're gonna hit new. You'll go new. Then you will get new proposal. So you'll name it. I usually name it the property address, so just say 123 Full Street. If it's listed in the MLS, you can press this MLS Connect and you can enter the MLS ID and press find, and it will import all the data into your offer. Pretty cool. I always like to include property photo. So if you're importing an MLS data into your offer, just check here on the listing type. So property is the only option here, so that's fine. It used to be income, land. You'd have to select what type of property, but I guess not anymore. Just enter the MLS ID and then press find. It should find it. Okay, now our MLS, we use Claw, Vine Los Angeles West Side. Our MLS has a very unique numbering system. If you were to enter a new listing this year, it would start with 24. If it was a listing that was entered last year, it would be 23. So it's always been like that. If you were looking at a listing that was entered into Claw from 1999, it would start with 99. So it's 99 dash. So now it's 24 dash and then a few 6 numbers. That's our listing. When you see a listing from a different MLS, it's gonna have like numbers, letters. So you'll enter that ID here and press find. It might not give you any results. So my recommendation is sometimes you'll see a listing ID. It has 2 letters, then a bunch of numbers, and then 2 letters on the end. Try removing the last 2 letters and press find again. It should come up. If that doesn't work, put those letters back and remove the first 2. Like just play around with it. It should find it. But usually I pick up the last 2 letters and it finds it. So I just created a file called RPA, this is what I was working on. And then here's the documents. So anyways, I'm going to open up what I just handed out. I'm going to share it with everyone on Zoom right now. Chat area. Give you guys the RPA, which was updated yesterday. That is the brand new RPA. So we're going to open that up here locally. I will share it with everybody. The first document that we have, and feel free to write down, write on it, make notes if you want to take notes on it. Okay, so we're writing an offer. All right, so the first thing is how do we even know what to put on our offer, right? So I would say the most important thing right now is have you talk to the lender, right? Because the lender is really the one who's going to be guiding you of you know, how much money they're lending and how long do they need for the appraisal? How long do they need for full loan approval? So only the lender can answer those questions. So whenever someone says to me, JJ, I need to write an offer, I'm like, great, here's what you need. You need the person's name. Sounds pretty basic, but you know what? You need their legal name, right? If they're giving you proof of funds, then the bank statement should have their name on it. So what are proof of funds? If someone is buying a property for 20% down, so let's just say, just for round numbers, it's about $1 million, they're putting 20% down. That means they need to have 200,000 in their bank account. So they need to show bank account that has their name, a current date, and a balance of 200,000 or maybe a little more than 200,000, because don't forget we have closing costs. It's going to be a few costs like escrow fees. So that is what I call proof of funds. It's going to be how much they need to bring into the deal, and they're showing a current bank statement. So that might be 3 or 4 different bank statements combined, whatever it is. It could be stock portfolio, whatever it is, that's called proof of funds. So I need to know their name. We need proof of funds. Ideally, like a pre-approval letter from a lender. So we're very blessed here with Rocket Mortgage in our office. Rocket Mortgage is an online lender, but they did a pilot program testing in-house. So we're part of the test pilot program. Rocket Mortgage can actually close a deal in a week if they have to. It's insane. So if you have a buyer that needs to get a loan and you're going up against cash offers, you can tell them to talk to Rocket Mortgage and they can do a 7-day, 10-day escrow. So, yeah.
Are they part of Keller Williams or are they outside?
It's a part of Keller, but they rent an office here and they are awesome.
Oh, they've been around.
I don't know how long Rocket Mortgage has been around, but they're pretty, I think they're the number 1 online lender, I think.
I recognize them.
Yeah, they're pretty awesome. I have never, I've never heard a deal that they couldn't do. Like, I mean, they'll tell you right away because they can spit out a pre-approval like within 24 hours, maybe the same day. And if once that's done, it's done. Pretty awesome.
I never recognize that.
1980, yeah.
Thank-
One other thing, owner of Brackett Mortgage used to be LeBron James's boss. He owns the Cleveland Cavaliers.
That was nice.
Dan Gilbert.
Dan Gilbert, thank you. Richard, got a plethora of knowledge in there. Thank you for sharing. So yeah, I mean, we're blessed to have them here because I've never heard of a lender that can close in a week,
That's amazing.
right? That's pretty awesome. All right. The first document, so what are we getting to prepare for our offer? Name, proof of funds, and we need a lender pre-approval. That lender pre-approval is gonna tell us how much is being borrowed, right? The purchase price, how much is being borrowed, what the rate and the points are, hopefully. And sometimes they don't put it on there and then you need to call or text the lender and say, what's the rate that I need to put in my offer? And then how long do you need for appraisal? And how long do you need for full loan approval? So those are the dates that we're gonna need to write our offer. Once you have that information, you can write the offer. The other thing to take into consideration is call the listing agent and ask, are there other offers, right? So I also want to write a winning offer. How to write a winning offer? How do I do that? So I need to call the listing agent and say, what are common terms that you would counter someone? If I wrote an offer to you, regardless of what's in my offer, what are common things that you counter? They might say, well, I use this escrow company, I use this title company. So I'm asking that because I would like to write my offer that they don't have to counter me. I would love to write an offer that can be accepted. So I'm gonna ask the listing agent, what are common things that they would counter? What is the seller looking for? Does the seller want a quick escrow and a lease back, right? Would that help them if they got their money and then they could stay on the property for a little while as a tenant temporarily? So I'm just trying to find out like what's important. Obviously, price is important, obviously. Aside from price, is there any other thing that the seller is looking for? And I'm gonna tailor my offer to that. I'll talk to my buyer and tell them this is what the listing agent said to me. And hopefully we're gonna be the winners on the offer. The whole goal here is to get your offer accepted. You want the listing agent to deal with you. As a listing agent, it's very important to me to have a buyer that's not gonna back out of it. Very, very important. So if I have 5 different offers and they're all the same, like they're all in the same price range, I'm gonna be looking at the motivation of the buyer. Because I want someone who's not gonna back out, right? You can have 5 offers on a property and that's what got the price to where it is. But if the person that you pick backs out 2 weeks later, you're gonna start now going back to the other 4 people and they're gonna be like, well, now what's wrong with it, right? Now you're gonna have to explain the property prices just dropped. So it's very important from the beginning that you pick the right buyer. Here's the purchase agreement, so we're going over today. So perfect timing. So that being said, as a buyer's agent, I want to win the deal for my buyer. Now, this is not about getting your buyer the best price. If you really are, if you're up against other people, this is not about price anymore. This is about winning. Okay, because you're not gonna get the price if you're up against other people. You have to beat everybody. So you have to be the one that's willing to pay more than everyone else. Okay,
Do you think a lot of agents, like when you ask them if there are other offers, like do you think they lie about that? And if
you always have to assume that the agent is telling you the truth. So your buyer may not believe it, but you always have to assume that's possible. And when this really comes into play is a property's been on the market for almost a year and you write an offer and then you get a counter offer, which is a multiple counter. And your buyer's like, what the hell's been on the market almost a year? You're giving me a multiple counter offer. You're telling me I'm competing with another buyer. This is ridiculous. It happens all the time that a property sits on the market and then all of a sudden there's activity. Happens all the time.
And they can't tell
Believe
you how much.
They can tell you everything. They can tell you. So we're gonna go through it today. So, all right, so the first document is the agency disclosure. This is gonna be signed when you enter into a relationship with a buyer or seller. So it's also part of the buyer representation agreement. But now we're talking about the purchase agreement. So, now this form is also attached to a lease. If you're involved in a lease that's over a year, we'll check this box in the upper left-hand corner. This form is being provided in connection with the transaction for a lease, hold interest exceeding 1 year. Now, as a company policy, we always include an agency agreement, always. But the law says for a lease, it only needs to be attached to a lease over a year. We always do it. It's a company. We always have agents. So what does this form say? It says that there are agents that represent sellers, there are agents that represent buyers, and an agent can represent both a buyer and a seller. And our broker represents both. We're talking about the broker. Okay, what are our duties? We always have a duty to be honest and fair. And we have to disclose anything we know to the buyer, right? We have to disclose. They added a sentence here that says real estate broker commissions are now set by law and are fully negotiable. That is brand new. So that's interesting to see that on an agent agreement.
Where is that?
It's right here. Real estate broker commissions are not set by law. So that was recently added. You can see here at the bottom, this on every form in CAR, it says when it was a major revision. If you look here, it says August of 2024. So this is a brand new agency form. So they added that commission dialogue right there. All right, so you're just gonna check buyer. You'll put your buyer's name. The agent is the broker. That's Keller Williams Beverly Hills. Here's our office's DRE number. You'll put your name and your DRE number. This civil code on page 2 is just the law saying that agency has to be provided and what needs to be on this. Okay, that's it. Okay, so now we're gonna get into the purchase agreement. All right, here we go. So when you're in car.org and you're entering this information, if you just double click on this area, it will automatically put today's date. Now, this is called the date prepared, and that date is the date that this contract is going to be referenced by. So it doesn't matter when it gets signed, it doesn't matter when it gets accepted. When we're referring to the purchase agreement dated, this is the date that we're identifying this purchase agreement by. Okay, it's the date prepared. All right, so our buyer's name is going to be there, property address is going to be there. If you did MLS Connect, remember that button MLS Connect? When you went into CAR, if you clicked MLS Connect and you imported this data, this will pre-fill in. If not, you're going to have to enter it manually. So you'll enter the property address, the assessor's parcel number you can get from public records. It'll also be on the MLS. Okay. The seller's brokerage. So you're going to put the listing brokerage's name there and their broker DRE number and who the agent is and their DRE number. Now, what if there's more than one agent representing the seller? You don't have to worry about that right now. Just put one person here. What if you are on a team or you have another agent helping you represent the buyer? Again, you don't have to worry about it. Only one agent's name. Okay. I've seen, all the time, someone will put two names, two DRE numbers in the same line. You don't have to do that. So just put one person's name, the DRE number. So, all right, let's keep going. Purchase price. Just for the sake of keeping things round numbers, I just put $1 million here. Very hard to find properties for $1 million nowadays, right? All right, but just for the sake of easy numbers. So purchase price 1 million. If it's an all cash buyer, check all cash, right? Check if all cash. Okay, close of escrow. It seems totally normal to check this box and just put 30 days, 45 days. Now, you need to contact your lender. This is a question. How long do you need to close escrow? Sometimes a lender will be very busy with refinancing. What would happen if rates went down half a point today? Right? All of a sudden, the lender's phones are ringing off the hook for refinancing. So maybe that's going to extend how long they need to close escrow. because they're busy now. But I don't like to put a number here. Why? If I'm competing with other buyers and everyone's writing 30-day escrow, 30-day escrow, I'm just another 30-day escrow buyer. But I can put here, check this box and write C3R. And then I'm gonna go down to 3R down here in other terms. And I'll just show you. Close of escrow to be 30 days after acceptance or sooner by mutual agreement. Buyer is willing to close escrow as soon as lender is able. That separates me from the other 30-day buyers, right? So I'm trying to have a winning offer. So close of escrow to be 30 days. Now I have to put here close of escrow to be 30 days. I have to put a firm timeline because that's part of a contract. Time is one of the elements of a contract. You have to say close of escrow to be 30 days or sooner by mutual agreement. So let's go back here. All right, expiration of offer, it's automatically going to be expiring 3 calendar days after the last signature. So once the last buyer signs. Now, keep in mind here that sometimes you're going to be writing an offer on a property that says offers due by a certain date, right? That date might be 2 weeks from now. I would suggest not sending your offer till the last second, because if I'm the listing agent and and it says in my listing offers due 2 weeks from now, and you send me an offer today, I can very well just use that information for new buyers that come into my open house or calling me and saying, where do I need to be? And I would say, well, I'm not really sharing that information with you. Well, can I be at this number? Can I be at this number? And I might say, well, I already have an offer higher than that, right? So now I'm shopping your offer, which is totally okay. I can do that. It's not okay with you, but I can do that. So I would suggest if you're coming in with a really strong offer, not to give it till the last second. That's my suggestion. All right, so, but if you do submit your offer early, you might want to extend the expiration. You don't want your offer expiring, right? So if I'm submitting an offer now that's not going to be responded to for 2 weeks, I'm going to change the expiration date for 2.5 weeks from now. Okay. All right. Initial deposit, 3%. That is a standard deposit to write down for a purchase for a single family or condo, usually 3%. If you are a listing agent and you receive an offer with only a 5,000 deposit or a 10,000 deposit, you want to give a counter offer and request 3%. So usually my counter offers will say purchase price to be blank, and line 2 will say deposit to be 3% of purchase price. I want to make sure that there's 3% in escrow, and that protects my seller if there's a problem down the road. I want a full 3% in escrow. So we'll get to that later and when we talk about liquidated damages. So keep that in mind. When does this money need to go into escrow? When is this necessary? So now we're telling our buyer, once there's an acceptance, you have 3 business days to get this money into escrow. So today's Wednesday. If we had an accepted offer today, when is the money due into escrow? Today's Wednesday. So we have Thursday, Friday, Monday. So Monday, that's going to be sent to escrow by wire transfer. If you look at the language on that, it's actually saying it's going to be by wire. So no one's bringing a check to escrow. That's going to be a wire transfer. If Monday's a holiday, it gets pushed to Tuesday. Okay. That's the only thing in the contract that has to do with business days. Everything else is calendar days. Also, when are days calculated from? So days are calculated from the day of acceptance. It doesn't matter when escrow opens. Escrow, like if we have an acceptance today, Wednesday, we don't even have to open escrow until Monday to get the money, right? So I'm just saying, it doesn't matter when escrow opens. Everything is calculated from the day of acceptance, and all times run concurrently from the day of acceptance. So 3 days, everything is from the day of acceptance. All right. Increased deposit. Sometimes I've seen buyers say, I'm happy to even put more money than 3% in after I do my inspections or after I remove contingencies. So, that's something that might make your offer stand out. It's not common, but you can. All right, the loan amount. So I'm just saying here that the buyer is putting 20% down. which means they're borrowing 80%. It would be an $800,000 loan. And then you're gonna put in here a rate and points for the loan. That information is gonna come from the lender. If it's an FHA loan, you'll check this box. If it's a VA, you'll check that box. Seller financing is something that we haven't seen for a while because interest rates have been low. Now that interest rates are climbing a little bit, seller financing might be more, you might see it, encounter it more. So that is something that could happen. Just check the box and it'll give you a new sheet to talk about what you're offering to pay the seller to carry the paper. All right.
People still really.
Yeah, I mean, look, you could have.
That was in Buffalo.
Look, there are some sellers that, are totally happy to get a better rate from your buyer, right? Because they're gonna get the full down payment. It's gonna come to them. And then the loan is secured by the property. If the buyer stops paying, then it'll go to foreclosure. And the seller will probably get their money back at the foreclosure auction, is what'll happen. Someone will bid and they'll get their money. Usually what'll happen. Nobody bids, they get the property back. And they get to keep the full down payment. Someone will probably buy it at the auction. Okay, automatically this stuff is going to get entered, the balance of the down payment. So now I want to point out here, there's a box here. It says occupancy type primary is default. So by default, this is going to be their primary residence, or if checked, secondary or investment. Never, ever, ever. I don't use the words never or always, but I'm telling you, never check this box. Never check these boxes. If you check one of these boxes, you may have just raised the interest rate on your buyer's loan. Okay, because the interest rate for an investment property is going to be much higher than a primary. And who are we to decide if our buyers are going to actually move in or not? They might change their mind and say, you know what, I do want to live in there, right? So it's up to the lender to actually make that decision, whether they believe the buyer. It's not our decision. So if you have a buyer who has a 8,000 square foot home and they're moving into a 1,000 foot home, the lender may not believe it, right? But that's up to the lender to decide, not us. So I just know if you check that box and all of a sudden your buyer gets a call from the lender, hey, your rate just went from 6.25 to 8.25. I know you're gonna get a nasty call, right? So don't do that. All right, so I wrote here a little note at the bottom, call the lender to get the following information before writing your offer. How fast can you close? So 30 days or less. What interest rate and how many points should I put in the offer? So that was up here. And then how long do you need for appraisal and loan approval? So those are going to be days that we're going to get to right now. All right, now we have some interesting stuff that is newer to the contract. At the top of page 2 of the RPA. So when I say page 2, if you look here, it says RPA page 1 of 17. So now we're at the top of page 2 of 17. The first paragraph here is a seller credit to the buyer. Why would we be asking for a credit right now before we even do inspections or anything? It's just weird, isn't it? Well, let's talk about that for a second. If you have a buyer that doesn't have any money, but they have a lot of income, and just some scenario, they just got a new job, huge income, no money saved yet. So they need help with their closing costs. Okay, they're gonna get approved for, say, an FHA loan for 3.5% down, but they don't have any extra money. You can bump up, basically, if their property's asking $1 million, you can say, I'm gonna write my offer for $1,010,000, and then check this box and ask for a $10,000 credit. So that extra $10,000 that you're basically rolling into the loan is going to help the buyer, or it's going to be a credit. So it's going to help the buyer with their closing costs. It'll pay the escrow fees, it'll pay lender fees, whatever the extra fees are that the buyer needs to pay, prepaid HOA, reimbursement of some property tax to the seller, prepaid property tax. So it gives an opportunity to do that. Now, there's another reason to use this box. We are now in a real estate world where we have buyer representation, right? So before you guys are even writing this offer, you've already signed a buyer rep agreement with your buyer, hopefully. Right, everyone with me?
Yes.
Buyer rep agreements. Your buyer rep agreement was signed. That your buyer is paying your commission. That's what the buyer rep agreement says. It says the buyer is gonna pay the commission. Just says 2.5%. I personally do. Copy me, don't copy me. I don't want to use the word standard because I don't want to get in trouble. So I personally signed my buyer rep agreements at 2.5. Now, I have the opportunity to ask the seller to pay that on the next line. Seller agrees to pay the obligation of buyer to compensate buyer's broker under a separate agreement. So check this box and say, and you're gonna ask the seller to pay the buyer's obligation that's written in your buyer representation agreement. So you've already signed that. If you haven't already signed it, it's part of this DocuSign. You're filling it out at the same time. Now, I can't ask for more than what is on my BRBC. If my BRBC is 2.5, I can't ask for 3. Okay, I'm asking the seller to pay my obligation. Now, what happens if what happens if there's an agent that is advertising 4% paid to the buyer's agent? All right, you're like, oh, this is payday, 4%. And the unfortunately, the real answer here is that extra 1.5% doesn't go to you. Unfortunately.
You can ask for credit.
Here's the deal.
for your-
Here's the deal. You signed a buyer rep agreement with your buyer, right? You agreed in advance that your buyer would only pay 2.5. If you try to get more, you could get sued by your buyer. Because you have a fiduciary relationship with your buyer for 2.5. And if there's an extra 1.5% being dingled in front of you, and that does belong to your buyer. Okay? This is what attorneys have said to us. That there might be, you know how you get those little postcards in the mail? If you were represented by a buyer's agent and were asked to sign, a higher agreement than you were originally contracted for, you are part of a class action lawsuit. So that could happen 3-4 years
I've
from now.
seen it before.
Right, it could happen. So, okay, so what we should be doing is, if we're using paragraph 2, if we're 2.5%, fine. Your seller agrees to pay the obligation, 2.5%, fine. Now, if there's an agent out there saying 4%, what's gonna happen is you're gonna put the 4% credit here and not use the next paragraph. You're not gonna ask the seller to cover the buyer's obligation. You're only gonna ask for the full 4% credit that the agent is advertising. What's gonna happen is there's gonna be a 4% credit from the seller to the buyer. So the buyer's accounting sheet will have a 4% credit from the seller. And escrow will deduct from that 4% the 2.5% to pay you. And that extra credit goes to the buyer. So, right? Escrow does the accounting.
Yeah.
So the listing broker is gonna give their listing agreement to escrow, which says how much the listing side commission is. Buyer's agent, you are gonna give your buyer representation agreement to escrow, saying how much the buyer is paying you. So that's gonna go on the buyer's accounting side. Now we're getting a credit from the seller, and then the buyer is paying you out of that credit. Yeah.
How would be on G1, the 4% credit that you're saying instead of G3?
If there's money being offered to a buyer's agent, say, that's higher than what you already have signed, that technically should go to the buyer.
In what line though?
So you're gonna ask for a credit on 3G1
Right, on G1,
instead of using 3G3.
right.
I wouldn't use 3G3 now.
Do that anymore.
Right, now I'm only asking for that giant credit. It's been advertised. Yeah.
It's never so difficult to change or amend the BRBC. So why don't we just,
Why don't we just use a modification of terms for the BRBC to say 4%?
I mean,
So your question, I was thinking the same exact thing. We'll just use a modification of terms and raise the buyer representation agreement from 2.5 to 4.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, so I said that to the attorney that's on the CAR forms committee. I said, we'll just use the modification of terms. And she said, oh, she said, you're gonna get sued
Really?
because the buyer's gonna wake up 3 years from now and say, why did my agent make me sign that? I agreed to 2.5 and my agent sent me a modification to 4. Now I'm financing that extra 1.5 for over 30 years. Why did he ask me to do that? Right?
I never realized that.
Yeah, so you gotta look at it from the other side. Right now, if you wanna keep that money.
There you go.
Who wants to keep the 4%?
Hello.
Okay, if you wanna keep the money, my suggestion is send your buyer a new BRBC. Don't use the modification, send them a brand new BRBC for 4%.
She said that's wrong.
I'm just looking for the loopholes. I don't know. I'm trying to prevent a lawsuit. I'm trying to prevent, like, look, we work hard for our money. I know we do. I know agents are gonna want that 4% and
Yeah.
they're gonna get it, right? If you're gonna get it, try to avoid losses, right? So use a BRB, a brand new BRBC, not a modification of terms. A modification of terms should only be used to go down,
Okay.
not up. That's the consensus. Idar, you have another question or no?
No, I got it now.
Okay, yes, use the modification of terms to go down, but not up. If you're gonna go up, send a brand new BRBC. And not just for the specific property, for all property. Right? Okay. Okay. Verification of cash and verification of down payment. If by default in the contract, it says that is attached. So by default, the contract says you are attaching proof of funds and a pre-approval letter. So your buyer should have already filled out a loan application. Now you have to decide which box you're checking here, pre-qualification, pre-approval, or fully underwritten pre-approval. Let's talk about those differentiations real quick. A pre-qualification is, I called my lender and basically, based on what I told him over the telephone, he's sending me a pre-qualification letter. Based upon what you told me, I can make that loan. That's the pre-qual letter. Pre-approval letter means I've received your application, I've checked your credit, I've verified your income and your assets, and based upon all of that, I can make the loan. That's a pre-approval. A fully underwritten pre-approval means all that information was given to the underwriting department, and the underwriting department reviewed everything and fully approved the buyer. The only thing that needs to be approved now is the property itself. Appraisal, right? So that's a fully underwritten pre-approval. You will see a lot of times agents asking for a DU approval. This is what they're asking for. It's not a 1 page. It's gonna be like a full 10-page, 20-page report that gets spit out by underwriting, fully qualifying your buyer. So pretty intense.
It's a DU.
A DU, direct underwriting approval, yeah. So that's a fully underwritten pre-approval. That underwritten means it came from underwriting, right? Okay, let's keep going. Final verification. So your buyer. Oh, by the way, I don't want to skip. So the default is that you are going to be attaching proof of funds and attaching your loan approval. So that's by default. If you check this box, you can say, well, I'm not going to give it to you till the offer is accepted. So I don't know many agents that are going to play ball, but maybe. If you're the only game in town, you can ask for whatever you want. If you're competing with other buyers, you need to flex and do your best to get your offer accepted. Okay, the buyer has the right to go and do a final verification 5 days prior to close of escrow. So the seller is going to move all their stuff out of the property. They might have agreed to some repairs. So the buyer has the right to come in within 5 days prior to closing and verify that no damage was done by the movers. The agreed upon repairs were made. So that's the buyer's right. Assignment request, 17 days after acceptance. You have to be very careful as a listing agent about flippers. Flippers that want to assign your contract. So I don't really mind a buyer putting a property in their own trust or their own LLC. I have no problem with that. But what about a buyer who thinks they're getting a great deal? So they write an offer, they get an accepted offer with no intention of buying the property. They're taking the accepted offer now and they're shopping it to other buyers because they think they can make a quick 50 grand or 100 grand. Okay, so you have to be careful as a listing agent about this assignment request. If I get an offer from a buyer only putting $5,000 deposit, that could be a wholesaler. That's what we call a wholesaler, someone who's trying to flip contract. And there's a lot of it going on right now.
You don't check this by if you're a listing agent assignment, and you can assign it. It's not illegal.
Most of the time, this assignment was used
Yeah, for somebody's.
for transferring the property to your own trust, your own LLC, right? But not assigning the contract,
Right.
right? So just gotta be careful. I'm just pointing that out. Be careful.
What do you do to discourage that?
So you can put in your counter offer, this property shall not be assigned to any third party. That could be one of your terms. So it depends.
On the listing plan?
From the listing agent. So if I get offers, and it used to be very common that people would write offer and or assignee. They would put that in all the time. I'd say, why are you putting and or assignee? It's just so we can take title in our own trust, right? Or our own entity. No problem. But that language is creating some kind of problems now because of people wanting to flip contract. This is a new phenomenon. I know you've seen advertising, you're coming across an ad on the internet or maybe a spam email that says, buy a property with no money and make a quick 50 grand or, there's a lot of people doing this now. So just pointing it out.
Or to sell the.
Wholesalers, yeah,
Like I said.
is it legal? So, there's a lot of companies that they have off-market listings. So here's what happens. They write an offer, you see all these advertisements, all cash offer, get an all cash offer.
Yeah.
Type your address in, we'll give you an all cash offer within 24 hours. Someone comes to the property, they write an offer. It appears it's like a 1-page, 2-page offer, and it very clearly says this offer may be assigned. Right, with no further signatures. Okay.
They disclose it.
They disclose it in front. You're writing an offer, and the seller's like, "Wow, this is amazing."
Yeah.
Right? I don't have to do an open house. I don't have, right? So those commercials you see, no open houses, no agents, cash offers. That's a company that comes and they write an offer. And what they do is, once they have an acceptance, they put it on their website and they blast it out to their community. We're gonna have showings on this day for this 1 hour. And during that 1 hour, it's gonna be like a giant open house for their own buyers that have registered with them. And you're gonna have all these contractor flippers come and all these other investors come. And they try to flip the contract for 100 grand.
I said, only good for someone that's really desperate and needs a quick sale. And other than that.
Yeah, because a lot of sellers think my house is a tear down. And I'm gonna get a cash offer and it's a great offer. I'm willing to take this much. And someone comes in and they offer it. They have nothing to lose. And now they're just trying to flip it for 50 grand. Why not? Right? So the people that can pay the most for a property are the people that have a crew that can come in really and actually flip the whole property in 3 weeks. They come in, they're flooring, walls, right? They have a whole crew. So for those kind of people, they buy material in bulk. They have a formula, no changes. They can come in, chop, chop, chop. No permits even.
Do they buy any house in the Rolling Hills area or my daughter's house? Just give me that.
There are,
Sell it as advantage. There's nothing you can do that.
you type cash offer, you're gonna get a whole bunch of.
Really?
Yeah.
No buggy for days.
What's gonna happen is they're gonna write an offer and then they're gonna try to sell it.
If they don't sell it, they're gonna come back.
They back out, maybe they lose $5,000 because remember, they didn't get a 3% deposit.
So it's not final.
But you have to be very careful with their contracts because
Right.
they don't want to lose money. Be careful.
Okay.
All right. So how long does a buyer have to get a loan and to get an appraisal? To investigate the property, to get into the property. So by default, all these times are 17 days in the contract. So they have 17 days for a loan approval. If it's an all cash deal, you can check this box, no loan contingency. Someone who's paying cash doesn't really need they don't need a loan. So obviously no loan contingency. If they are buying cash, they also don't need an appraisal, but they still might want one for whatever reason. Just know as a listing agent, when you receive an all cash offer, if they did not check this appraisal box, appraisal is a contingency of the deal, even if they're paying cash. So just know that. You have to check the box if there's no appraisal contingency. Now, per the lender, when the lender tells you how long they need for loan, you can shorten these days. Okay. So this is, you're gonna lower this number, that will strengthen your offer. If you're the only offer on a property, there's no reason for you to shorten any time. If you're the only offer, you're not competing with anybody, yeah.
So when someone says, all cash and contingencies, that's just saying they don't.
If someone says all cash, no contingencies,
That's
they're
short.
basically saying I'm paying cash for the property and I'm taking it as is, and yeah, that's what that means to me. But I know that there's things I need to do as a seller to make sure that that is really what we're getting. Because the seller still has to disclose, right? So as a seller, if you give me an all cash, no contingency offer, my counter offer to you is gonna be, okay, here are all the disclosures, sign those, and then we have to do it. Right?
Do you have to give disclosure even if you have cash?
I'm just saying, once you give a disclosure, the buyer can back out based upon the disclosure. I don't, so
If
there's.
you ask no disclosure,
There
then
are laws. There are laws. There is a way to make a bulletproof deal.
Hmm.
So we have, but the seller has to do everything that's their responsibility in the contract. So we're gonna talk about it. All right, so by default, everything is 17 days. I've shortened these to 12 just to make my offer more competitive. Investigations, 12 days. Now, if I get an accepted offer today, I can get my inspectors there pretty quickly. My general inspector, my chimney, my sewer, my, foundation inspection. I can get everyone there. Old inspection. Today's Wednesday. I'm sure I can get everyone there by Friday, the weekend, Monday, Tuesday. I don't need 17 days. That's a long time. The reason I would need maybe this long, is if there's one inspector, I want this inspector and that inspector books up, right? So I want to wait for that inspector. So I might call my inspector and just say, what does your schedule look like? My general inspector is gonna be the most important.
in the case of like that probably that we had,
Yeah.
was a problem in that one. I mean, you can anticipate that there may be a problem. You have to bring a couple of other specialists to look at the problem. You need more than 12 days.
Yes. So
How you
in
protect-
real life, what's gonna happen? The seller is giving you a certain amount of time to inspect.
Yeah,
You
okay,
may bring an inspector that uncovers some huge issues.
yes.
And you now are gonna be asking the seller for more time to investigate the things that were brought up. Seller does not have to give you that time.
Oh,
They only have to give you the time that's agreed to in the purchase agreement.
in order to be protected, can you put it 17 days? That
If the
is.
seller wants to keep the deal together, they'll give you the time. If they think that the concerns are warranted, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So everything is a deal. Like you guys are gonna learn I learn on every deal. Yeah.
But if the seller does not want to give you that time, then the buyer can back.
Then it's up to the buyer. Move forward and
Right,
remove your
and walk
contingency
away.
or walk away or walk
And
away.
not move anything.
Correct.
Thanks.
Correct. That's always either cancel or continue,
Okay.
right? So now what does the seller have to do? The seller is saying, I'm agreeing to the $1 million and I'm giving you X amount of time to get your loan, to get your appraisal and to investigate the property. You need to, after 12 days, remove those contingencies. What's a contingency? Contingency is an excuse to back out without losing your deposit. So basically, I'm agreeing to sell my property for $1 million. I agree to close in 30 days. I agree to give you this time to do what you need to do. But at the end of this time, you need to remove your contingencies. And by the buyer removing contingencies, that means if they don't complete the deal, they'll lose their deposit. But I, as the seller, need to know that because I need time to move out. I'm gonna call a mover. I'm gonna pay a mover. I'm gonna move all my stuff out of the property. I need to go lease another property or buy another property. I'm starting to incur expenses, and I'm not gonna start incurring those expenses until the buyer removes their contingency. That's how I know the buyer is gonna finish this deal, right? And if they can't finish the deal, I get to keep their deposit, right? All right, so what are we shortening here? So the buyer has 12 days to investigate or 17 by default. Informational access to property. So this is an interesting one. Informational access is not investigations. So let's say we remove our investigation contingency, but we put a larger number here for informational access. That would be like, I'm buying a tear down, or I'm buying a major fixer. But while we're in escrow, even though I've removed my contingency, I still want time to access the property to get my designer in, my contractor in, I still want informational access to the property. Yes, that's what informational access is.
So that's 12 days beside the 12 days that you had for
Right.
inspection.
You might have a 7-day investigation,
Oh,
but you're asking for a full 30-day, the full 30 days for informational access.
oh,
You don't want to lose that time. You want to get your people in there.
What's the maximum you can ask?
You can ask for everything, whatever.
Oh, whatever.
Everything's negotiable.
Everything.
Okay, here's a really important one now in California, insurance.
Oh,
You used to be able to call an insurance company and literally get insurance the day before closing,
yeah.
like not a problem. So a lot of insurance companies have pulled out of California. Sometimes you can get an immediate quote. Sometimes it could take 2 or 3 weeks to get a quote, depending if it's in a fire area. So you don't know. This is important. I would say, as soon as you're making an offer on a property, have your buyer call his insurance company or her insurance company to get a quote ASAP. That's very.
If you ever, let's say that you get the quick insurance quote from underwriter and all of a sudden before they close the escrow, they cancel it.
If you,
Somebody supervisor, I'm gonna cancel, you have to get a new one. What do you do?
the lender won't make the loan. The lender won't lend.
Oh, so you have to, oh,
Right, because if I'm a lender,
yeah,
and I'm loaning 800,000, who has more risk, me or you?
yeah, you,
Right.
yeah.
So I, as the lender, need to make
You
sure that
loan.
fire insurance and flood insurance, I need to make sure that if something happens to that property, there's insurance that's gonna rebuild the property to protect me as the lender,
Yeah,
right? The lender has the risk.
yes,
Just like your.
The lender can always put forced insurance on a property. If the homeowner stops paying their insurance company, the lender will find out and they will put a forced insurance policy and start billing the borrower for the insurance. Yeah, so you have to protect the lender.
Did they get the insurance? You said JJ?
So basically the buyer is gonna immediately apply for insurance. And then a bill is going to be sent to escrow. And then the buyer is usually gonna pay 1 year of insurance upfront. That's part of their closing cost. They're gonna put into escrow 1 year of insurance. Escrow is gonna pay the insurance company with the money.
this is 1 year,
To protect the lender.
is that mandatory to
I
pay?
think, it's up to the lender, but I think that's what happens, isn't that? I think that's pretty standard, that a 1 year policy gets.
Yeah, yeah,
I think that's standard. It's up to the lender, but I think that's what's.
So we're writing this agreement, residential purchase agreement. We're sending our offer. During that time, the buyer is looking.
ASAP. Tell the buyer, contact your insurance.
before you write the offer, you.
Yeah. Yeah, all the insurance company needs is your buyer's date of birth and the property address. That's all they need.
What?
Review of seller documents. So let's talk about this one real quick, only because it's a little strange the way it's written. Review of seller documents. Okay, if we go down to this paragraph here, it says seller delivery of documents. The seller has 7 days after acceptance to give us disclosures. Okay, the seller has 7 days to give us disclosures. So let's go back up here. And this says review of seller documents. All right. So by default, we have 17 days to review disclosures. Or we're shortening to 12 days after acceptance, or 5 days after delivery, whichever is later. So we need to think about this for a second. Let's say we have an accepted offer today and we get disclosures on Friday. So how long do we have to review them? What this is saying is we will always have a minimum of 5 days after delivery.
The business day, no?
We're always gonna have a minimum of 5 calendar days to
Calendar.
review disclosures, always. If disclosure, so let's say our contingencies are expiring in 12 days.
Mhm.
And we get disclosures on day 11,
Oh, you still have.
okay? We have 5 days, so you will always have 5 days. So now that we're saying 12 days after acceptance, so whichever is later. Now, if we get it 1 day before, if I have the number 12 in here, and the disclosures are given to us on day 11, I'm actually gonna have
Give them-
12, I'm actually have 12 days to review the disclosures from day 11. Oh, I'm sorry, 12 days after acceptance. So what would have happened if it didn't say here 5 days after delivery, I would have only had 1 day. Because I asked for 12 days after acceptance.
Right.
This is protecting the buyer to make sure that they have at least 5 days after delivery. That's what it says. Yes.
But you said like, in your example, if they
Yeah.
gave it on day.
If they gave it on day 11.
They can't give it on day 11 because they have only 7 days.
Correct. Hopefully.
Okay.
So I like to get disclosures, hopefully, before the inspectors come. Hopefully. If the disclosures are not coming quickly, I'm gonna call the listing agent and say, can you at least give me the transfer disclosure statement and the seller property questionnaire? Those are two disclosures that have to be manually filled out by the seller. They have to answer questions.
Actually, sometimes the seller send me the accepted offer. They send it with the.
I want it. I want the TDS and the
They send it right away after that.
That's what I really want the TDS and the SPP, because that's where the seller is disclosing, has the property been painted? Is there any unpermitted area that you're aware of? Has anyone died on the property? Like, these are very important disclosures that I can go to the inspector and say, the seller disclosed that there was a leak here. Can you look at that area and make sure that it was repaired? Oh, by the way, if the seller disclosed that there was an insurance payout, like that's one of the questions, did you get, was there any insurance settlement? If there was an insurance claim on the property, that doesn't mean that the repairs were made. It means the insurance company paid them for their claim, but did they make the repairs? Right? So when someone says, yes, there was an insurance claim, tell the inspector there was an insurance claim here. Can you make sure the repair was made? Right? So just sharing that with you. All right. Preliminary title report again. Very important. The seller has to give you clean title to sell. I mean, title just means that the buyer is going to have 100% ownership of the property. So that's going to happen. You can review the title report. Now you also have time to review the HOA documents. So if you're buying a condo, the seller has to order the HOA package. So that's going to come from escrow through escrow as an official communications or escrow. You have time to review that. If you're buying a condo, you basically want to know things like, are there any rental restrictions? Can your buyer rent the property, right? If they decide that they want to rent it out to someone, or do they have to wait a year? Sometimes there's going to be a 1 year or 2 year even. Sometimes there's no rental, you can't. Can you have a barbecue on the balcony? Does the building allow pets?
Everybody asks that.
Everyone asks that, right?
Barbecue, everybody asks.
Barbecue, can I have a barbecue? Yes.
Aside from the HOA, like for rental restrictions, how can we find out if the seller isn't aware? Like the county or?
The seller has to disclose what they know. If they don't know, they don't know.
I know, but.
So now you're saying, how can you protect the buyer? Yeah.
There's rental
The-
restrictions.
So you're gonna get a copy of the HOA disclosures. And an official copy should come through escrow. So what's gonna actually happen is escrow is going to contact the HOA or the management company and say, I need an HOA package. I need a sale package. So that's gonna include minutes, right? Meeting minutes that you should review with your buyer, hopefully. You're not responsible for reading through all this stuff. I do go the extra mile for my clients and see if anything sticks out to me, but I'm not, I tell them, look, I'm reading what I can, but don't hold me responsible. I'm looking at what I can. But you should definitely be looking at this and tell me if you have any questions. But things I'm looking for, pet restrictions, rental restrictions, anything weird pending assessments. Right? And look at the meeting minutes. Is the building been talking about replacing some $1 million project, right? And they're gonna bill everybody in the building? Question, Pinar?
What would be the most proper sentence to tell to the buyer that legally we are not responsible from reading the HOA documents, but
Oh, the agent?
as an agent?
I'm sure that it's part of our standard stuff. I'm sure.
To read it up to a certain point, but we have to also disclose that it's not ours.
I would say in the statewide buyer and seller advisory, which is one of the slower, it advises the buyer that's the need to do that. And there's also a buyer information advisory. There's a lot of advisories
Okay,
that protect us as agents.
okay.
Yes, I mean, we are not expected to be reading every page of the HOA documents,
Okay.
for sure. Sometimes they don't even go to the agent.
Really?
Yeah, sometimes HOA sends it directly to the buyer and we never even see it.
Okay.
Yeah, that happens a lot. Okay. Let's keep going. So common interest disclosures, review of leased or liened items. Oh, this is an important one. What would be a leased or liened item? Solar. Water filtration, like the Gulligan stuff. When you have those giant tanks outside, the water fills salt, right? Or solar, there could be a solar lease on the property that has to get transferred to you. I have seen recently a buyer approved for a purchase, approved for a loan, and Tesla Solar did not approve them. Can you believe this? They were in escrow, full loan approval, and Tesla, when they applied to the transfer on the lease for the Tesla Solar, they were not approved.
So what happened?
The seller had to pay it off. Yeah,
Yeah, so
just be careful with this. So when I'm interviewing a seller, for a listing, on a listing appointment, I'm asking them about their solar. Can I get a copy of your solar? Right, because I want to see it. I want to read it. Is it transferable? How does that work? Does the buyer need to apply? So that has to happen like ASAP.
years ago, I had a listing appointment like that. People are a little more savvy now with solar. People don't realize how much of a debt that takes them from their equity. I mean,
Yeah.
it's maybe pretty significant. At when I was 80, she had didn't have much left in there.
Yeah. So it's attached.
Yeah.
And some of those leases need to be paid off on transfer. Like the title's gonna make it be paid off.
JJ, if you have a roofer that you put the solar system in there,
Yeah.
can it be rented? I mean, you're responsible, you buy property with the roof. Yeah.
When you buy a property that already has solar installed, you're buying the property as is.
I did.
You need to make sure that there's nothing leaking. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah, the solar.
But you want the solar, I mean,
I don't think you could go back as the new owner and sue the old roof. Or the installation. That would have been on the previous owner. You're now buying it as a new owner. There might be a transferable warranty. That could happen.
That could be.
There could be, but it would have to specifically say this is a transferable warranty, and then there's California law, like, I don't know. So, but that would be my first thing is, can I see your receipt and your warranty? Is it transferable? I would look into that. All right. Okay, now here's a checkbox on 3L9. Sale of private property is not a contingency unless checked here. Sometimes you're gonna have a buyer that needs to use money from another property that they want to sell, right? They don't have all the money in the bank. They have a property that they need to sell in order to buy.
That's the 31 exchange.
It could be a 1031 exchange,
Or it could be,
but we're talking here about a primary residence mostly. The 1030 could be a 1031, could be, but we're talking usually, yeah, it could be 1031.
could be 1031.
But now, if your buyer needs to sell another property, okay, you're gonna check this box. It's gonna pull up form COP, contingency of property. If I'm a listing agent and I am receiving an offer from a buyer that needs to sell another property, I'm gonna start doing a little investigation here as a listing agent. What property are you selling? Right? How much is it actually worth? How much is owed on it? What are you gonna be listing it for? I might give a counter offer I might advise my seller, here's the information I've found. Let's give a counter offer, seller counter offer 1, saying that the buyer agrees to list their property by such and such date at such and such price. Because I don't want my seller to accept an offer
Right.
with a buyer that thinks they're gonna get 3 million for their house that's only worth 2.
So you put the time, let's say the property hasn't been sold for 2 years.
Yeah,
And the guy come in and say, you can't wait 2 years, so you're allowed
I'm gonna say it needs to be listed at this price by such and such date,
and be sold by such and such.
or not be sold by such and such date. Yeah.
The people say,
Well, that's gonna be in the COP. That's gonna be on the form.
a lot of
I
people,
just want to make sure the property is gonna be listed by a certain time and for a certain price. I want to make sure that
Right.
the buyer that I'm accepting an offer from is realistic what they're gonna get for their property.
but if it's on the escrow, you say that, I mean,
Right? If it's in escrow,
that's
that's fantastic. I love that.
Yeah,
But I'm just presenting that information to the seller. The seller is the one who makes the ultimate decision, right?
Yeah.
I'm never gonna answer for my seller or for my buyer. I'm just gonna present them the information.
yeah, okay.
Okay, time of possession upon notice of recordation. So when does your buyer get to move into the property? When do they get possession? When we have notice of recordation. So what does that mean? There's a document called a grant deed. And that's what gets signed by the seller. It says, I, seller, for valuable consideration, hereby grant my property to buyer A or buyer B. And that gets notarized and it gets recorded. We will get a phone call from our title company or from escrow saying, congratulations, we have confirmation of recording. At that time that we get confirmation, we can no longer go to that property as a listing agent. We'll be trespassing because it now belongs to the buyer.
If it notice of
Recordation.
recordation,
The grant deed. So once that grant deed is confirmed recorded, it belongs to the buyer. What I do as a listing agent is I will leave a combination lockbox at the property with a key. And when we get confirmation, I'll call the buyer's agent. I'll say, congratulations. Here's the combination to the lockbox. The key for the front is in there. The rest of the keys are in the kitchen drawer. And then they can meet their buyer there and walk through and have a party, bring champagne. But that's when you're gonna get possession. Now, what if you're not getting possession at recording? Here's the next paragraph. Seller occupied or vacant units. If the seller is gonna stay, we have two options here. Is the seller staying for 29 days or less, or 30 days or more? And there's an important distinction between those two items because once someone is in a property for 30 or more days, they are considered a tenant. If for 29 days or less, we are not creating a tenancy relationship, we are giving a license to remain in possession. It's a license. I called the city of Beverly Hills and I said, will you enforce this? If we sell a property in Beverly Hills and there's a license to remain in possession for 29 days and they don't move out, will you come get those
they
people?
said no.
And they said we would do it with a court order.
Oh.
So they said what happens is if people don't like to let it get to the 30-day point. So if you're having problems with someone not moving out on time, make sure you are going to the court or to a judge right away before it hits the 30-day mark. Once it hits the 30-day mark, you have 10.
What judge you have to go to?
You have to go to a judge. You have to go
Beverly Hills,
to I have an agree, I have a license here. Someone's violating their license. Yeah.
So they need a couple of months. At that point, you write like a short-term lease agreement or something.
So-
Or- I think it gets complicated, of course.
So basically, if the buyer's allowing the seller to stay, they're taking a risk, right? And they should be consulting their attorney. Now, when you consult an attorney, the deal might blow up. Saying, like the attorney's gonna say, well, this can happen, this can happen, this can happen, this can happen, and the buyer's gonna freak out and say, right. So
It's really messy.
now, if a seller is going to be staying in a property past close of escrow, I just want to know, like, do they have a place to go? Like, where, because if they don't have a place to go, that's concerning.
Yeah,
Or if they do have a place to go, I'm not so concerned. Like, they're already in escrow on another property, they already bought another property.
yeah.
They just need a little time, that's fine, like, okay. But if they have no place to go and they're waiting for something to come on the market, that could be concerning.
But how do you know that if they're,
You're asking, you're finding out. I mean, you're talking to the other agent.
Their words.
I'm listening to the buyer's agent telling me what's going on with their buyer. Or I'm sorry, I'm asking the listing agent, does your seller, why do they need to stay on the property? Right?
If the seller has got some contagious disease or something, get a heart attack, he can't move. If somebody's early,
Trust me, there will be issues that come up in your house. It's just gonna happen. Yes, all those things that you're thinking of that could happen will happen. Yes. All right. What happens when you have tenants in a property? When you have tenants in a property, you're gonna check this box, tenant occupied property addendum. If you check this box, it's gonna pull up this addendum. And the first line of the addendum is gonna say, there's a property to be delivered vacant. Or there's a checkbox, property to be delivered with tenants. Okay, so that, you don't have to worry about it unless there are tenants, and then you'll, trust me, you'll be reading that. Tenant occupied property item. Let's keep going. The seller has 7 days to give disclosures. The buyer and the seller both have 5 days to return escrow documents to escrow. So what's gonna happen is, we're gonna get an accepted offer. We're gonna send the accepted offer to escrow. The buyer's agent, you, are gonna send escrow your buyer's contact information. The listing agent is gonna send escrow their seller's contact information. But what escrow is gonna do is they're gonna send you, agent, and the listing agent a draft of the escrow instruction. You're gonna review it and say, yes, I approve this, or changes need to be made. And then escrow is gonna send those escrow documents to your buyers and sellers. They have 5 days to sign everything and return it. Do they do it? No, no one returns these things on time. We need to push everyone to get things going. 30-day escrow is fast. It's really slow to us because we're not getting paid. So every day for us is torture, but 30 days does move very fast. It's fast.
JJ, if, what was, I forgot it,
So everyone needs to,
the seller has got his own escrow and the buyer has got his own escrow, or do you want it
same escrow company,
for both?
but they're getting paid from the buyer and they're getting paid from the seller, but it's the same escrow company.
Or the same escrow? Oh,
Same
okay.
escrow, one is,
Before used to be two, no?
no, always one.
Always.
One escrow company.
Thanks.
escrow fees are determined, or is there a
So
percent?
they're regulated by the state, I believe.
Yeah,
It's like is a percentage or is a fixed fee?
yes.
I believe it's a percentage based upon the purchase price. But they have a lot more leniency in how they calculate. Title is not as loose because they're an insurance company, so they're very heavily regulated. But I don't think escrow companies are as heavily regulated on their fees. Title is very regulated.
These are all closing costs, right? Under
Those are
the,
costs, yes, those are additional costs. So both the buyer and the seller will have additional costs aside from the purchase price. Escrow fees, title fees, that we'll talk about that in a second. We're on the next page, we're
we
talking,
always ask seller to pay for closing.
the seller will pay for the seller's closing costs. The buyer has their own closing costs. Seller has most of the closing costs. We're gonna
We ask
talk about costs on the next page.
Escrow usually, there are certain documents that they're not sharing with the agents.
Oh, yeah, that happens,
So it-
because that's personal information probably.
And also some of they want some confirmation on my reports, like signature of receipt, etc. So, in such cases, do we have the right?
I'm not aware of much that you won't get a copy of. Usually you'll be copied on everything except for the personal information.
Okay. Is there a necessity for us to remind them that we need a copy of everything, or is it like?
Usually what happens is at the close of escrow, escrow is going to send the buyer side and the seller side a closing package.
Yes,
And the closing package should contain everything you didn't get yet.
before the time.
After closing,
Oh,
after closing, we'll send a closing package.
there is nothing to jeopardize the contract action.
Escrow should not be jeopardizing your contract.
Okay, good.
Oh, that would be bad. All right, let's see, time, okay, so the seller here has 3 days to order HOA documents. Okay. Now this is an interesting one. I don't follow it in practice. I should be, because it's part of the contract, let's talk about it. It's saying here that smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detectors, and water heater bracing will be done within 7 days after acceptance.
That's not correct.
So I used to order this is what we call retrofitting. Everywhere in California, you have to have smoke alarms, you have to have carbon monoxide detectors, and the water heaters need strapping so they don't fall over in an earthquake. That's California across the board. I used to not order this work to get completed until after the buyer removed their contingencies. Because my seller is probably going to be the one paying for this, probably. And I don't want my seller to have an expense until I know the buyer is for sure buying. How do I know the buyer is for sure buying? Contingency removal. That's how I know. So I used to order this after contingencies are removed.
How
But
do
it's
you
here, the
verify?
contract is saying that it should be paid for by the seller within 7 days.
How do you verify? So escrow company, they get a report to the escrow company? Or you ask, them?
So I always use a company called a retrofitting company.
You know, if you are a seller, and how do you know the buyer has to know that the seller has done that retrofitting? When you get,
So different cities have different ordinances. Escrow is the one that's gonna be asking for it,
or is
but you need to be the one pushing for it.
push it,
I can tell you, like cities like Palos Verdes.
Yeah.
Okay, in that area in Torrance, the custom is that the listing agent does not call a retrofitting company to do this. They wait for the buyer to request the retrofitting to be done. It's weird, like it's weird for us because that's not how we do it. We, as a listing agent here, we normally have a retrofitting company come, check the smoke alarms, check everything. And then before close of escrow, we do the retrofitting.
yeah,
Other cities may not have this requirement for a third party company to do it. I always recommend having a third party company do the retrofitting so the seller is not responsible. Here's the thing with retrofitting. You have to have smoke alarms and carbon monoxide and water heat trapping. It's the seller's responsibility. No matter who pays for it, it's still the seller's responsibility. If you have a flipper that is willing to waive retrofitting, and the seller and the buyer are all willing to waive retrofitting, escrow is not going to enforce it, but it's illegal. Escrow's not going to stop it. Like if the buyer and seller both agree, escrow's not going to say we're not closing. Like that's not their job. Escrow will still close. However, the seller will be responsible if God forbid that something happens. So my concern is, yeah, you have someone who's going to flip a property, they don't care. But what if they apply for permits and they decide to rent the property while they're waiting for their permits to get approved? So they decide, you know what, I'm not gonna leave the property vacant. I'm gonna rent it for 6 months or 8 months and not lose the money while I'm applying for my permits. Someone moves in and God forbid there's a fire and there were no smoke alarms. The seller is now the one responsible for that.
If retrofitting was not,
If the retrofitting wasn't done, it falls on the seller. And the buyer rented the property, right? The family's gonna sue everyone, the buyer, the seller, but it's ultimately gonna fall on the seller.
if the city, if it was not a city requirement, then
So it's a statewide requirement. It is a statewide requirement. That's what I'm saying. It is a requirement. And the requirement is for the seller, it falls on the seller.
then is it okay to tell the seller that no matter what,
No. So what I'm saying, I personally, as practice, I always hire a third-party company to install, to do the retrofitting. Now they are responsible. That's why I hired a third party. It shifts the responsibility from the seller to the third-party company. We hired the third-party company to install the smoke alarms, carbon monoxide, water heat trapping. Now there's no liability from the seller anymore.
It was getting sued as a third party.
Exactly. We shifted the liability.
if the listing agent says there is no retrofitting required,
There is a retrofitting requirement. Everywhere in California, there is.
then we should make the seller pay for it and do it, no matter what.
Okay, so the next page is who's gonna pay for it.
Quick question.
Yes.
So if you're selling the property so that normally you wouldn't do it until you got an offer, why wouldn't you just do it as soon as you get the listing? Because it's gonna have to be done no matter what.
Because the seller is gonna have to pay for it out of pocket. If
You
we
can
wait,
negotiate for the buyer to pay.
if we wait for the escrow to, right, if we wait for contingencies to be removed, the retrofitting company will bill escrow. And the seller doesn't have to come out of pocket, it'll come out of their proceeds.
Got it. Okay.
That's it. So it's just that the seller doesn't have to pay.
Come out of the equity of the home and all that. I got you. Okay.
Yes, I just don't want to incur expense out of pocket for
Got it.
myself.
Okay.
All right, evidence of representative authority 3 days after acceptance. This means that the buyer and seller, if they're buying in a trust, if the offer is coming from an entity, provide an offer and the seller is a trust or an LLC or a corporation, the seller is going to be asked to provide evidence that they have the right to sign on behalf of the entity. Right? That makes sense, right? Escrow is going to make sure that the right people are signing in the contract. Obviously, it has to be insured by title. So, all right, now we're going to say what's included. What is included in our offer? What are we asking for? Stove, the oven, refrigerator, If there's a wine refrigerator, we'll check that box. The washer, the dryer, dishwasher, microwave. Anything not attached, we're gonna add here. If it's not attached. If it's attached, it should automatically come with property.
Just a painting doesn't mean the size. If it's a painting, we like a tapestry.
No,
No,
yeah, that's hanging, that's hanging.
that's hanging.
Okay, video doorbell, if there's a Ring doorbell, you're gonna check the box. Security cameras on the property. Security alarms, smart home devices. Wall mounted brackets for video or audio. If you check that box, that means that the seller is going to take their flat screen TVs, but they're gonna leave the bracket. The mount. Bathroom mirrors is automatically checked. You can't uncheck that. It's automatically checked. It used to be a checkbox, and I used to tell agents, make sure you check this box. Or be careful with this if you have staged the property and those mirrors belong to the stager. But sometimes you have these really beautiful framed mirrors in bathrooms, and they're just hanging, and they're not there when you close escrow, and you're like, this bathroom doesn't look the same. What's going on here? And it was a gorgeous mirror that was taken. So now it's automatically checked, bathroom mirrors. Potted trees and shrubs. This is an interesting one. So you could have a bunch of pots around a property and the foliage has now grown onto the walls and attached to the property or on a trellis, right? So this is saying you do not want the seller cutting those and taking them with them. You want them to come with the property. If you're the listing agent and you receive an offer like this, you might have to counter it with potted plants that your seller wants to keep. So just keep an eye out for that one. Excluded items, staged items. If the property is staged, this is all personal property, but let's say now I want to just say, we're going to get to this later in the contract, but if the MLS says that the dining room chandelier is not included, it says in the MLS, dining room chandelier not included. And there's emails between you and the listing agent, dining room chandelier not included, right? But the offer doesn't talk about that right here as excluded. The deal comes with the chandelier. It comes with
Contractors.
the contract stands as the contract.
Yeah.
The buyer is gonna say, no, the money that I paid was for with chandelier.
The rule of thumb is anchored or attached to the property. It's sold with the property.
Yeah, it's with the property, it's part of the property. So it basically would, in the contract later, we'll get to it, it says that the contract stands. Forget everything else, it's the contract. We're gonna go.
Can somebody remove the chandelier and put the cheap one in
You
there?
can, I mean,
They
the
can.
buyer makes a sting, the listing agent's gonna have an issue.
That's not before the list, and they may do that.
Then you're fine.
Yep,
Usually, when I'm writing an offer, I have this template, like most of us, and everything is included. I just send it, and the listing agent counters that
correct.
with the.
So I'm just saying, as a listing agent, just be careful. When I go on my listing appointment, my original listing appointment, and I'm walking through the property, at that time, sometimes the seller will say, oh, by the way, this is excluded, this is excluded. I'm writing in large print on the outside of my folder at my listing presentation, exclude this, exclude that. When I'm receiving offers and countering, I'm referring to the front page of my folder because I always know that that's where I'm going to put that stuff, so I don't forget.
If they don't counter, but if they just send an email and afterwards, if they don't agree, for example, that chandelier thing, then would my buyer, and if I don't get the chandelier, would my buyer sue me for not fighting for that? Because it's a court case, so I should remind the listing agent to send a counter maybe.
So you're not going to be held responsible, but your buyer may need to take a small claims.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, small claims has been raised from 10,000 to 12,500. That's good. But that's what it is. Nobody wants to go to court. All right. Now we're going to be talking about who's paying for what. And these are requests, right? So we are going to ask the seller to pay for the natural hazard zone disclosure report. The seller has to tell us whether the property is in a fire zone, flood zone, earthquake zone. The seller has to do that But the seller is not a geologist, the seller, right? So the seller is usually gonna hire a third-party company. So I'm gonna check this box environmental, I'm gonna check this box provided by, and I'm gonna select my NHD. That's great, all right. Now, is the property in a fire zone? If you go and you go to this website on your phone, app.mynhd.com, you can quickly check if the property is in a fire zone or a flood zone. If it's in a fire zone, then you're going to hit the drop-down box here and you're gonna select Fortress Wildfire Exposure. And you're gonna select who you want the report to come from. If it's not in a fire zone, you will select not applicable. And here where it says provided by, you'll just type NA.
What's your website called? My,
You're gonna go to app.my.nhd.
APP.
That's a quick, it's a quick website page that you can check who by address if the property's in a fire zone. Now, we have things called city reports. We're gonna ask the seller to pay for the city report. Here in LA, we have something called a 9A report. It's actually 12C, but who cares? 9A city report. Other cities have different requirements to close escrow. We're gonna ask the seller to pay for it if applicable. Now, this is all of California, has smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detectors, and water heater bracing. We're gonna ask the seller to pay for that. Government required point of sale inspections and reports, we're gonna ask the seller to pay for that. Government required point of sale corrective remedial actions, we're gonna ask the seller to pay for that. What are these extra things? Well, all of California has smoke alarm, carbon monoxide detector, water heater bracing. That's all of California. But what about certain cities that have low flow toilet ordinances or emergency earthquake gas shutoff valves? This is gonna cover those other city items. All right, now we're gonna talk about escrow. So who are we gonna use for escrow? Well, we should ask to use our escrow, Cannon Hills. Why would you use our escrow? Because they're good. If you have a bad escrow, your client is going to hate you and never want to deal business with you again. So most of the time when a listing agent is fighting for their own escrow, it's because they don't want a bad escrow. And they know that their escrow company is good and they want to keep their client, right? So the way that I fill this out is I want both to pay the same low rate because I don't want an advantageous situation only for the seller where the seller is paying $1 and my client's paying 5,000. That's not fair. So I say both to pay the same low rate. I have to tell you, this does get countered often. It does get countered when they'll say each to pay their own fees. And when someone says each to pay their own fees, it means the seller is probably paying less than the buyer.
Yeah.
Probably. So did you have a question, Richard? So that's how I fill it out. You can fill it out, right? This is just my recommendation. Okay, who's gonna pay for title? So we're gonna ask the seller to pay for title. That's how it works here in Southern California. The owner usually will pay for the title insurance policy to ensure the buyer gets 100% ownership of the property. And we're gonna ask for Clearmark Title, which is Jerry Ferris. You can ask for First American, Lauren Goldman, or Fidelity National, Brandon Miller. We have 3 great title people here, so just choose one. Now, seller is going to pay for the title policy for the buyer. If it's a cash deal, that's the only price for title. If the buyer on their own is getting a loan, because that has nothing to do with the seller anymore. If the buyer is getting a loan, the buyer is going to insure the lender for their title policy. Okay, the lender wants to be insured that they have a first position loan and no one comes before them. So the buyer is going to pay for that title policy. Okay, so the seller pays for the buyer pays for their lender.
Beverly Hills doesn't have city transfer tax.
Beverly Hills does not have city transfer tax.
No city transfer.
Yeah, Beverly Hills, there's a lot of advantages to Beverly Hills. They don't have a city transfer tax. They don't have a EULA tax, right? There's no mansion tax. So, but we are going to ask the seller to pay for both county and city transfer taxes. So that's a major closing cost for the seller, those taxes. We're going to ask the seller to automatically to pay for HOA fees, right? And we're going to ask the seller to pay the HOA transfer fees. Okay. So make sure you check that box. Private transfer fees automatically by the seller. So that is a newer thing in the purchase contract. That's good. Thank goodness for that. Because there are a lot of places that don't even know about private transfer fees.
What is that?
Marina City Towers.
Yeah,
So the way that I used to write my offers were private transfer fees. I would check seller and I would write if applicable. So I had a client that bought a condo in the Marina City Towers, and it turned out that they had like a 5% buyer private transfer fee.
Oh.
3% or 5%. It was sick. And I had checked it, and the seller had to pay it.
that fee?
And thank God I did my offers like that.
What is that fee transferred by?
It's a private transfer fee. The HOA says when a property sells here that they get 3%. Or they get
All right.
So now it's automatic. They changed the contract. And by default, the seller pays for it. So I like that. That was good because this is a surprise to any buyer. They're not
Yeah, you know that.
private transfer fee. All right, home warranty. What is a home warranty? When your buyer buys a property, if something goes wrong with any of the appliances, the stove, the refrigerator, if there's a plumbing leak, if the garbage disposal breaks, if there's a roof leak, if the pool equipment breaks, there's something called a home warranty that will cover all of those appliances and those issues. The buyer, the new owner, the buyer will just pay a service call. Now they're like up to $90. That's it. They'll pay the $90 service call and the item will get returned.
What's the maximum that you can ask seller to pay for home
You
warranty?
can ask whatever you want.
Let's say that is.
It has to be agreed, right? Everything is agreed. So I like this CRESS enhanced policy. Select the checkbox. Select the 13-month CRESS enhanced plan. Make sure you change the wording to enhanced. Because by default, it's not the enhanced plan.
You put $695, that's for the, what price of?
$695 is the cost for a 13-month CRESS enhanced plan for a house. That's the cost for
What's the
a
price
house
of the house?
under 5,000 square feet.
Under 5,000.
Under 5,000 square feet, that's the cost. If it's a condo, it's $615. Then if the property has a pool, you can add $190. Now, there are some things that, like, I have a shared folder. I'm just gonna show you in my,
That's you said.
let's see, I just wanna find. That's the thing. Okay, so in my shared folder, I do have, one of the folders here is called, home warranty company.
Oh,
Okay, so in my home warranty, here's the Fidelity National Home Warranty. So here it is. I'm gonna open it, I'll show it to you. So this is what a home warranty looks like. It's an insurance policy paid for by the seller. So you protect your home. So here it is. It protects all these things, pool, spa equipment, garage door, even the garage door, kitchen, refrigerator, blah, 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 blah. So here on the last page, I'll just show you. Here are all the things that it's gonna cover. So I'm selecting this one, the enhanced plan. Okay, so $695 for a single family. $695 for a single family, $615 for a condo. It covers the plumbing, the jet tub, the garbage disposal, the hot water dispenser, the pressure regulator, sump pump, toilets, water heater, electric doorbell, garage door opener. Not only that, it includes all these extra things, air conditioning,
that's,
washer dryer option, kitchen refrigerator. It included everything. Now, there are additional things that you can add to it here on the right, like the pool spot for $190. So this is what we're asking for. Why would a seller pay for this? Why should they? Because what is the biggest lawsuit in real estate? Non-disclosure. Right. So a buyer buys a property, they move in, and 2 weeks later, the refrigerator breaks. And the buyer now calls their agent, you, and says, my refrigerator broke. I think the seller knew, and I'm suing the seller. Taking them to small claims court. They knew the refrigerator was on its last legs. They didn't disclose it. Right? Just as an example. If the seller buys this warranty, they're not going to get called. The buyer, if I get called by my buyer and they say my refrigerator just conked out, I'm going to say, wow, good news. The seller bought you a home warranty. All you have to do is pay $90 and it will get fixed, no matter what.
If it's an expensive house, like over 10 million, something,
Right.
how much warranty is gonna have to ask? You have to ask the warranty company.
So, yeah, you're gonna call the warranty.
For
You're
warranty,
gonna call them, yes.
if it is like that.
You're gonna call it. Now, this can be used for a duplex, triplex, right? There's all these different. Right, you're gonna call it, but, yeah. Can you explain why the down payment is 170? Someone asked, can I explain why the down payment is 170? The down payment is actually 200, but 30,000 of that was the deposit. So the total down payment was 20%, which is 200,000. And then they put 30,000 as their deposit. Now they owe the balance, which is 170. Hopefully. All right. Okay, now I have here other terms. So here were the terms I was talking about. Close of escrow to be 30 days after acceptance, continued rental agreement. Buyer is willing to close escrow as soon as lender is able. Great. I have an added thing here. It says seller agrees to initial paragraphs 26 and 28, liquidated damages and arbitration. We'll talk about that in 1 second. Also down here, it says, if applicable, add to the above other terms. Buyer is related to buyer's agent, or buyer has a California real estate license. These are things that have to be disclosed. Here's the place to do it. So if your buyer has a license, you'll just add up here, buyer has a California real estate license. If you're related to your buyer, you'll need to add up your buyer is related to buyer's agent. That's it. Bless you. Bless you. Okay. Now, what is this business here about seller agrees to initial paragraphs 26 and 28? In California, you can have a contract, right? We have contracts in California. And there can be places in the contract that require initialing. If those parts of the contract are not initialed by both parties, they're not part of the contract. So what can happen is we can send this contract to the seller. We can initial paragraphs 26 and 28. And the seller actually accepts our offer. They accept it, but they don't initial those two paragraphs. We now have an accepted offer, and paragraphs 26 and 28 don't apply. That's what happened. So that's why we're writing in our offer that those paragraphs, that the seller agrees to initial those two paragraphs.
So you protect it to 3%.
Protecting our buyer.
Right.
Yeah, so we'll talk about what those paragraphs are later. But you need to put in here that the seller is agreeing to initial them because you don't know if they're going to or not.
If one party initials, only the buyer initials, it's not.
It's not part of the contract. You have an accepted offer and those paragraphs don't apply. All right, so now we'll keep going. We've now gone through most of the stuff that needs to actually get filled out. So we've done 90% of everything. The rest of this contract is going to be language that are terms that we're going to get into. So now we should know. Just okay. So if the property was tenant occupied, check that box. And also before there was another checkbox at 3 and 3 to check. We're going to look and see if any of these things apply. Is the property in probate? Is it a manufactured home? Is it a tenancy in common on title? Is it a co-op? Co-op is unusual, but they do exist around here. It's rare. There are people that bought or made an apartment building and they wanted to convert it to a condo. But it doesn't meet all the necessary requirements to be a condo. So the only other option they would have would be to become a co-op. So basically the total ownership of the building will be held in title under a corporation. And then each person that lives there has stock in the corporation with the right to occupy a specific unit. So that's how a co-op works. A lot of buildings in New York are co-ops. In a co-op situation, the ownership can approve or not approve the buyer. They have to approve this. So there's buildings in New York that they want to make sure that the buyers are solvent, right? That they can afford to live there and pay the HOA fees every month. So it's not as common here in California. Just know if you're dealing with a co-op, I think there's only 2 lenders in the country that I'm aware of that will lend on a co-op. So something to be aware of. The listing agent will probably be aware of that. If you are listing a property in a co-op, look at the past listings and see what the agent remarks are about who the lender was. Because I'm sure there are remarks. All right, if you're buying a property that's in a mixed use building, so let's say you are making an offer on a condo and the first floor are stores. It's gonna be more and more common, by the way. You're gonna check this box and there'll just be an addendum. Wire. If you're attaching an addendum, okay, here's the place. If it's a backup offer, we'll check this box. It'll attach a backup offer addendum. What is a backup offer? That means that there's already an accepted offer on the property, but you are still writing an offer to be in backup position. If the first offer falls apart, you are now the new buyer. That's backup position. So we want to do that. If you're in a multiple offer situation and you didn't win, definitely ask the listing agent, can I be countered for backup? Can I be your backup buyer? If the property has a septic tank,
Empty like mine, like.
you'll check this box. And that's gonna talk about inspections for the septic tank. If the property is a short sale, you'll check this box. If the property is in probate, and it's,
So this offer will go for the short sale also, or?
you're just gonna look at these things and see if they apply to this particular property that you're writing your offer on. If they
If it's
apply,
short sale, then you have a new,
you'll check this short sale box.
and the box, something comes up.
The addendum, yeah. So, if here's the 1031, John. Seller intent to exchange addendum. So if there's 1031, you're gonna check this box and it's gonna pull up the exchange addendum. These are automatically checked, which are part of they're bundled. If the property is in a trust, or if your buyer is buying from a trust, you'll check this box for the trust advisory. Some brokerages like to include a statewide buyer and seller advisories. You can include it. If it's an REO, you'll check this. Probate, check this. Okay, so again, it's going to be particular to your particular purchase. All right, let's look at what I highlighted here. All right, all cash offer. If an all cash offer is specified in 3A, if you check the box cash offer, no loan is needed to purchase the property. This agreement is non-contingent on buyer obtaining a loan. All right, makes sense? All right, let's look at the loan part. Buyer's loan status. Buyer authorizes seller and the seller's agent to contact the lender. How's that? Okay, guys, so just know that the listing agent has the ability to call the lender and say, did you look at everything from this buyer? Did you run credit, right? How far along are you, right? You have permission, the listing agent has permission to call the buyer's lender. Okay, limits on credits to buyer. Here's an important one. The lender has to approve credits. Anything that has to do with money has to be approved by the lender. Okay, so if you're representing your buyer and you do your inspections, and now there are issues that have come up that you want to now ask the buyer for a credit, the first call is to the lender, and just say to the lender, what is the maximum credit I can get? What is the maximum credit the buyer can get for this loan? That's all. They're just going to give you an answer what the maximum credit is. That is called the lender allowable credit. How much will the lender allow to be credited? That is different than a contractual credit. Contractual credit could be anything, right? You can ask for 100,000 and it's agreed to, that's contractual credit. So what this paragraph says is any credit to buyer shall be disclosed to the buyer's lender. If the total credit allowed by the lender is less than the contract. So what's happening? You ask for 100,000 and the lender is saying, no, we only allow 30,000. The contractual credit says 100. The contractual credit shall be reduced to the lender allowable credit. So if you wrote in your contract 100,000, everyone agreed 100,000 credit, and the lender says, no, we only allow 30, you just lost $70,000 for your buyer. Okay, so that's why it's important to have.
His business not too a lot because the seller is paying that.
Because you just said, it says here, it gets reduced, it's part of the contract. In the absence of a separate written agreement between the parties, there should be no automatic adjustment to the purchase price to make up for the difference. So they've lost the money. So here's the situation. when you call the lender and you say, how much is the allowable lender credit? And they give you a number. If you're gonna be asking for more, don't ask for a credit, ask for a price reduction. That's how you have to get it.
Right.
And you can mix it. You can say this much credit, this much price reduction.
Price reduction also, isn't it, messing with the lender's purposes?
Yeah, all the numbers are gonna change. Yes, that's why you always need to contact the lender.
And they,
It's fine, they'll have time to do it. That's fine.
but they wouldn't agree maybe on that price reduction.
No, it's okay, that's fine.
They're okay?
Yeah,
Okay.
the lender will allow you to pay less. No problem. It's paying more, that's the problem. Okay. Let's keep going. Okay, closing and possession. If buyer intends to occupy the property as primary or secondary residence, the unit the buyer intends to occupy shall be vacant at the time of possession. This is saying in the contract, buyer is getting a vacant property. Okay, we don't touch anything. Buyer is entitled to a vacant property. That's it.
The buyer can pick the best.
If I'm writing an offer on a no, if I'm writing an offer on a house, this paragraph is telling me that this is gonna be delivered vacant. That's gonna dole out. If I'm writing an offer on
For you,
for 2 to 4 unit property, one of them is gonna be vacant.
so you can pick the best one.
No, not necessarily. Because then we're talking about rent control, tenant landlord issues. If you were gonna, first of all, a lease can't be broken. If there's a lease, that can't be broken. A lease is the most powerful contract in real estate. There is nothing more powerful in real estate than a lease.
Can't be broken.
Cannot be broken. And the reason I'm saying that is because when a property goes to foreclosure, if there's a lease, if there's a tenant in the property with an actual lease, the buyer at the foreclosure auction is inheriting a tenant that they cannot kick out. That's why I'm saying a lease is the most powerful contract.
If it's a like a ADU unit in the property and you buy the whole house with it, but the tenant on the ADU wants to stay, you have to take him or you want to kick him out someone else?
Now we're talking about issues that there's a lot of what ifs. A lot of what ifs.
But you don't have to take that tenant with the
The
ADU.
buyer has to investigate the property and decide whether they're moving forward or not with what's there. If there's a tenant in the ADU, they're buying the property with a tenant in the ADU. If they want to buy a vacant property, then they need to put as a term in their offer, seller to deliver property vacant, completely vacant. Yes, question. I'm sorry, that's the TOPA, the tenant occupied. Addendum. Yeah.
So common leases are usually 12 months. Then it's month to month after that. So at that point, then you can.
Is the property rent control?
Right? Solid.
So you know, there are condos that are rent control.
Yeah.
You know the Twin Towers in Century City, 2160, 2170 Century Park East,
Yeah,
on the corner of Olympic and Century Park East, those two beautiful towers, those are rent control,
All
even though they're condos.
and they're new construction
It's not newer construction, but if you have a tenant in the property and their lease passes and they want to give you a check for month 13, even though it was a 12-month lease, you have to take it. Can't get rid of it. It's rent control. Yeah.
Any new construction is out of rent control, right?
Right now, yes.
Right now, yes.
Now, I don't know what's gonna happen with property 3 in November.
gonna change
I
it.
was wondering what's gonna happen with property 3. So, you're right.
I'm sure.
Okay, so condition of property on closing. Here is the as is clause. So sometimes you're gonna write an offer and the listing agent is going to give you a counter offer that says, as is, no request for credit will be honored, no seller's not paying it. And your buyer's like, what the heck is this? You say to your buyer, don't worry, all contracts are as is. Here's the paragraph, paragraph 7B. The property shall be delivered as is, its present physical condition as of the date of acceptance. The property, including the pool, the spa, the landscaping and grounds, is to be maintained substantially the same condition as on the date of acceptance. Seller is not responsible to repair any holes left after the removal of any wall hangings, such as pictures and mirrors, brackets, nails, or other fastening devices. And all debris and personal property not included in the sale shall be removed by close of escrow or at the time possession is delivered to the buyer. So this is saying the buyer is writing an as-is contract. The seller has to maintain the property as it is right now. They can remove all their art from the walls and take the nails out of the walls, but they're not making any repairs. That's it. That's where the paragraph is. Okay, seller remaining, yeah.
That doesn't include inspections and stuff. People think as is means that's it, where you find,
So as.
you still got to, you still got to do your due diligence and.
Yes, so as is means I'm making a $1 million offer as I see the property as is right now. Now, if I walk into the property and I see a giant hole in the wall, I'm making an offer clearly $1 million with that hole in the wall. So I'm gonna do my inspections now, and I'm gonna find out stuff I was not previously aware of.
That's where,
And I'm gonna ask the seller for credits to handle those problems that I was not previously.
where you're back out
I'm
of
not gonna ask for them to repair the hole in the wall. Because that I saw.
too much.
Yeah, of course. I have the option to not go through with the deal. Or now there's a negotiation. I agree to go forward, but I'm aware of stuff I wasn't previously aware of. So I agree to go forward if you credit me this to cover what I was not previously aware of.
Even if
That's-
JJ, yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry.
You just misconception, people think, like, especially selling thing as is means I'm selling it the way it is now and that's it. And then they're surprised, the inspections are done and all this.
Right. Okay, so you're right. So you're explaining to your buyer, the seller doesn't have to do anything,
Right.
right? They're
Okay,
selling it, the seller is selling it $1 million for as is right now. And then we'll do our inspections and it's up to you to move forward or not. Now, once we have our inspections, we're going to ask the seller for something. Hopefully they'll agree. If they don't, it's up to you if you want to move forward or not. We'll try to get them to agree to something.
If the seller say in the offer, right, on the MLS was the seller absolutely will not pay for any repair or anything.
Yeah.
Take the
I don't believe
price.
any of them.
That doesn't mean that.
Don't forget, the inspections I do have to be
You
disclosed to
still
any
have to,
buyer, right?
you still have to. Yeah.
The seller hopefully does want to make a deal, right? Now, there are sellers out there who are stubborn, and they won't give a penny.
You take it as it is and that's it.
There are sellers like that.
But you
And
can,
hopefully the seller won't blow up a deal for 5,000, 10,000, 15,000, like, hopefully, right?
yeah,
Hopefully. I'm a deal maker. I'm not a deal breaker, right?
Right.
But I could have a very stubborn client.
right,
I'm trying to push the deal forward.
yeah.
All right, seller remaining in possession. If the seller has the right to remain in possession after close of escrow, the parties are advised to consult with their insurance and legal advisors. So about informational liability. So here's the issue. If the seller wants to stay in the property, you need to make sure that the proper forms are agreed to. Remember those check boxes for 29 days or less or 30 days or more? You need to use those forms because it tells the seller, go get renter's insurance, right? Because you're no longer a seller. The buyer now has the liability. If someone trips and falls on the property after close of escrow, it's on the new buyer. It's on their insurance,
No,
right? You got to make sure that the seller is going to have a temporary renter's policy in place. All right. Seller shall, on close of escrow, provide keys, passwords, codes, means to operate all locks, mailboxes, security systems, alarms, home automation systems, intranet and internet connected devices included in the purchase price, garage door openers, and all items included in the paragraph where it says inclusions. If the property is a condo, seller shall be responsible for providing any items from the association. Buyer may be required to pay a deposit to the HOA to obtain keys. All right, so this is saying that the seller has to give the keys to all locks and all the codes. You will come across a situation where there's a lock on a property somewhere that the seller doesn't have a key to. I promise you in your real estate future, this will happen. You need to make sure that there are keys to everything. When that's it, it's the seller's responsibility. So that's all. If there's not a key to something, the seller's responsible. Just call the listing agent, say, sorry to break the news to you, but you have to call your seller. We need a locksmith here or something. So, all right.
We do it after the.
I just want you to know that it's the seller's responsibility. That's all. Yeah, I just want you to know that. So however it gets handled, just know that the contract says that it's the seller's responsibility to give you a key to everything.
If it's the pool area in a
Yeah.
residential
Yeah.
complex, then if the HOA charge
Well, that's a common area key.
common area.
Okay, so here it's saying if The buyer may be required to pay a deposit to the HOA to obtain that. That is
A
talking,
buyer has to do that.
buyer will have to pay that, yeah.
JJ, I'm sorry, I have a question about the insurance. It said that this property condition upon the buyer be able to get the insurance. It doesn't say at what rate. They say that the insurance is $200,000 or on. Doesn't say what price or what, but the insurance, I'm gonna give you for $200,000. And you say that you're gonna have to take the insurance. Are you bonded by this one? There's no,
So there's an insurance contingency in the offer.
right, and the insurance company say,
The buyer has to remove that contingency on time or not. So
at any price, your responsibility.
it's the buyer's, so who
At any price.
are we talking about now? The buyer or the?
Buyer, it's the buyer.
Yeah, the buyer has to approve being willing, right, so
You
if
can't say it's.
you have a buyer writing an offer in the hills
Right,
and they're getting quoted $30,000 a year for fire insurance,
yeah. You need to,
that's significant. So they're gonna have to decide whether they want to buy that property in the hills or not.
no, I'm talking about hundreds.
Yeah, 100,000, yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Possibly, yeah. Buyer has to decide it.
buyer has to decide.
Yeah.
All right, so it is 1 o'clock. I am gonna do part 2 tomorrow. I just want to let you know, if you can't make it tomorrow, these are recorded. I do, of course, I want you here, so. We did get through the meat and potatoes. You do have the forms here that you can read at your own leisure. I'm sure. But yeah. But I can guarantee you right now, you know more than most.
Yeah, I know.
I promise.
Thank you.
I know more than Jay did.
That's the newest thing.
He got
So, just let you know that the guys, the forms are updated like every other. day.
And then.
The sentence,
Okay. Say you said that's enough. That's fine. I said you have to get the.
Oh, wonderful.
So he costs $50,000, $50,000.
All right, so.
Thank you, JJ.
I, good for you guys are at the top of the industry.
So he has to pay.
Yes.
Maybe you I wonder if you can cancel and get a refund and find it for cheaper.
Depends if you can, if you get the coming from.
Yeah.
If you can.
Yeah, but if you don't have a better rate.
You have to find a better rate. And we had insurance in this house, all of a sudden on the right, they said no. I said that you have to, what is the second? You have to be.
Right.
I mean,
That's when I gotta be careful. That was a good question.
Yeah.
They're all over the place right now.
they are gangsters. They like get high.
Because everyone's leaving.